Okay, cool. So we're going. Also, I did remember this time to actually turn the volume up, so that way people who are listening to the pod will be able to hear any of you a little bit louder this time than the time before. And of course, first and foremost, thanks for tuning in for those that were able to make it on Sunday. I also want to note that I will be implementing a new way to track availability for future meetings. I'm shocked I didn't actually think about this before until we did the rock meeting. But I think what I'll most likely be doing going forward is having or setting up a Google form, and then that way I can ask each question to be, or I could have at least 7 questions, and each of the questions will represent a day, and then that will allow for me to have more than the amount of reactions you can have on, or the numbers I should say, to use on an actual reaction post in here. So, because otherwise I'd have to use a bunch of different emojis, and I wish that you could just have a number that's 11, or 12, but they apparently do not. At least I don't. Yeah, they don't. Like if you try to type in 11 or 12 on like a chat, it doesn't do anything. You can only go, I think it's up to 10. So that is unfortunate. I'm sure there might be some custom emojis or something that might have higher numbers. I haven't actually looked into that, but anyways, I digress. So that's something I'm looking into as far as possibly just doing a Google form and then having everyone just submit specifically what day. There's also the consideration of doing it a week in advance or 2 weeks in advance, where we'll ask everyone, hey, for the next week that's coming up, what does your schedule look like? That could be something as well. But like I said, we'll figure that out as far as what to do, so that way we can try and lock it in. Because right now the way we have it set up is it's kind of a 2-hour gap. And I just don't think meetings are necessarily going to last that long. And that could also be something that's kind of that's misrepresenting that, when really it's more of like the start time on the beginning. So again, some of that I'll be taking away and tinkering with, so that way we can have a little bit improved process to gauge availability. From there, really with where we're at currently is, and I'll just kind of go through, that's what I forgot to post. I was going to post the outline and everything, but in short, my outlines are pretty consistent for each of the meetings, especially at this point. So it's really just kind of us going through the overview of kind of top down from where we're at currently in the project. And I think right now we're at 2 or 3 leads currently. I know I have 1 in the pipeline, or I think 2 in the pipeline right now that I'm going through interview processes with. So hopefully that number could increase by 1 or 2, depending. From there, and obviously let me add on to that, right? Everyone or anyone who is interested in applying for a lead is, of course, more than welcome to. I will say that if you're someone who has been a lead, and or if you've been an officer with me in any of my previous projects, and you are interested in being a lead, that is something that I will weigh a bit differently. Primarily because I think that there's good, consistent value. It's kind of the approach of just promoting from within, right? For people that have kind of worked at a business or at a company, right? If you can find a suitable / eligible candidate that can fit the criteria and can be a good selection for said position, it can make things a little easier, I feel, when it comes to finding and kind of filling those positions. So, of course, if there's anyone interested in that, you're more than welcome to fill out a leader app. Otherwise, the biggest thing I would probably give as far as a takeaway, because it's not as though we haven't had more than 7 or 8 applications. We definitely have, though. I'm sure for anyone that knows me and has spent time with me in a project, or if you've ever been an officer or a lead before, you know that, the time that I typically take to, and the way that I go about vetting applicants is at least, and I should say at minimum, with a consistent standard that I want to uphold everyone to. So that way there is not only a good foundation that can be established from the top down, because for all intents and purposes, your leaders in a project are nearly by far your most important positions when it comes to how those individuals will interact and how they are representatives for their alliance and as leaders for the group. So it is just important to have good takeaways and individuals that really believe in a project, what they're signing up for, have a good understanding and being on board for that. Moving past that, as far as the amount of players that we have currently, I know just from looking at the sign-off channel, there's definitely quite a few that have kind of given us a soft reaction gauge. Again, I haven't gone through and vetted this yet because my approach to this now is actually similar to what I'm doing on the rock side, which is waiting for us to have our minimum required leads to start, if not at least something close. Again, ideally I would really like to try and have 7 leads, but if we're able to maybe get somewhere around 5 or 6, I may consider still going with that amount, but 7 at least for now is the target goal. And as I've mentioned before, that's predominantly so we can have 1 lead in each Zone 1 region to start, allowing for us to have that flexibility and adaptability to support, advance, and or withdraw from regions. You just essentially kind of have full maneuverability when you're able to put an alliance in each of the Zone 1 regions, and it just doesn't limit you in those regards. From there, with the checks, I think we're at, 99 at the -3 from these, so it's 80, 100, that's 180, 260, 265, -5, so we're at 260. If you look at the amount of reactions, given that I haven't gone through yet to filter those out, and as far as remove any of the reactions for people that are just not here anymore, I'm sure that's, from usually when I do it, it probably is about 15 to 20. So I would probably gauge about 230, 240. Somewhere around there is probably more of our true soft numbers, which even with that being said, that's still really good. Of course, with fitting initially 40 players per alliance, we still would at least need, 5, 6? We'd probably still need 6 alliances, at least at this point, which would in turn mean 6 leads. So, like I said, we'll continue to work on that and, see what kind of headway we can make in finding some more leader candidates. Beyond that, I'm trying to think right now, project timeline. So again, global release is coming up. It'll be here in 9 days, so you got a little less than a week and a half. The goal, as I had been consistently and reiterating throughout, is, we want to make sure that we're in a good place to give the players the best opportunity to be as successful as we can. And at least in this, and I guess you could argue even other kingdom builders, but specifically for CoD, my approach is more so of wanting to allow every player to be able to progress your account as fast and as much as possible. And one of the ways to do that is by trying to dissuade / progress in an unimpeded way, right? Meaning that you are not, you're not constantly at war, you're not fighting all the time. You're able to focus 100% of your investment into the account, whether that be from the money you spend, from how often and how frequent you're out gathering, to how efficient you are at leveling your heroes, etc. Right? Those are really important things. And, it's funny, I had this situation that had occurred when I was playing Infinity Kingdom, and I remember having to write up this really detailed post after our first KVK, which actually went really well, amazingly. And one of the things I noticed and had kind of had this revelation at the time was that, when you're considering playing and starting a brand new account, one of the interesting approaches and things to consider is the amount of outgoing resources versus the amount of incoming resources. And if you think about all the avenues that you are expending resources in, right, you have two building queues. If you get to VIP, you got 2 research queues, so that would be 4. You have resources that you might spend on healing, that'd be 5. You have resources you are using to train troops, right, so that's 6. Excuse me. And, oh God, I think that might be it, unless I'm forgetting or cannot think of another one. Policies isn't necessarily resources, but I guess it is loosely tied in. But yeah, so we'll just stick with 6 for now. I think that's okay. So the idea is, right, you have 6 outgoing resources, and the approach is, if you're thinking about fighting, right, and you're thinking about going out and how can you be as efficient and effective in conducting PvP as possible, right? How can you put yourself in a very successful or in a contributing position out in the field? And one of the ways you can do that is by working to get to a point where all of the incoming resources that you have are able to be fully invested and focused on the things that factor into PvP, right? i.e. training troops, that's number 1. Right? Number 2 would be healing. Right? So those are important things. And again, this loosely factors into leveling up your heroes and going out and getting XP, because you still have to train and heal. You have to have a certain amount, right, if you want to be able to field max legion capacities out there when you're fighting Darklings and participating in other events to get the rewards and the material that you need to level your heroes, right? So there is a little bit of cross connection there. But the biggest thing that you can really factor in is once you get to max buildings, once you get to max tech, right? You've essentially cut down the amount of outgoing resources that you have to disperse between building, research, training, healing. And now you've basically improved your efficiency by whatever it is, 66%. I'm sure it's probably more than that if I attempt to apply some literal math, but the idea is that you've gone from 6 outgoing resources to now only 2, right? Because once you get all your buildings at max, now you don't have to invest resources anymore. So now you're able to save a lot more resources. Once you get to max tech, same thing, right? You're able to reduce 1 to 2, and you're improving that. And so for me, that's what I think the most important thing is. It's kind of like the World of Warcraft approach for those of you that have played WoW, right? One of the things that, and I've said this in a couple videos, but one of the things that I always hear from some of my friends that play WoW is, you got to get to max level, right? You got to get there as fast as you can, because once you do, you'll really be able to start enjoying the game more to its fullest extent. And it's interesting how I look at that and I apply that now to kingdom builders, because now my approach is, well, why to an extent would I be wasting my time, fighting, so to speak? And let me be clear, it doesn't mean not to fight, but it's just in the grand scheme of, if you're trying to min-max your account as efficiently as possible, why would you not focus your every single thing you have on getting to that point as fast as possible, right? Getting to that max building level, that max tech level. And so, I think the idea is trying to set up a system in which that can be the focal point, and where that type of a situation and atmosphere can be created and or achieved as soon as possible, right? And that's kind of the idea to get there, which is where you want to try and get into a position where you're able to have that level of unimpeded progression and growth for your account. Because once you get to that point, then you can really, to your fullest extent, enjoy PvP in a very free way, in a very comfortable way, right? Because all of your gathering, all of your resource income, is only now going out to your PvP portion, right? It's only going out to fighting, instead of having to split your resource income and distribute that between 5 to 6 different avenues. So anyway, so that for me is kind of end goal, right? As far as the situation I want to try and get everyone to. I think if we can get everyone to, not necessarily max account, but at least max building level, right? Because obviously you're probably going to max your buildings out first before you do tech. So the approach there is how can we kind of get everyone to that situation where we can have them hit that first objective, which is getting all their buildings to 25. And then the second most important objective, which is, having you max your tech out, or if you want to be the type who just, hovers at T4 or max T4, how can we help you guys get to that point as fast as possible? Because once you're there, then you can really start enjoying the PvP side more. Because the challenge is, and this is the last thing I'll say before we move on, is if you're constantly fighting, every moment that you spend fighting is a step backwards that you're taking in being able to get your account to a max building and max tech level, which will also hinder and sometimes can delay the timings that you have when it comes to upgrading certain buildings at certain times. Because if you're resource strapped, but let's say you have the speed ups when you get max helps to then burn through it and go to the next thing, right? You're just getting delayed. Or if you don't have the resources, only because you're fighting, where if you weren't, you would have had the resources, that's delaying your account's progression. So again, it doesn't mean, I don't think there's never necessarily going to be a situation where it will just be that effortless, right? Where you go into a kingdom and, everyone's just like, I'm on board, you've sold me. Like, let's just all do that. Right? That would be great. I think that's a very difficult hill to climb. One that I've gotten very close to. And, it's like to an extent of where you haven't had to do any fighting at all to get to that point. But, sometimes, you might need to have a little bit of kind of dealing with the rogues, if you will, or the people, or sometimes it's the players, or it could be one or two alliances that just, maybe that's all they want to do. All they want to do is fight. So, again, that's another part of why it's very important that we go in as prepared as possible, because the preparation, a part of the preparation is to anticipate and deal with the worst case scenario, which is that you land in a kingdom and there's either a portion of players and or a portion of alliances that want to do nothing but just PvP. And if you are the biggest group and you have the most activity and you essentially are holding the biggest stick, that is something that can deter others away from wanting to engage in what ultimately is just, in my opinion, kind of pointless fighting that early on. Because in general, it's usually just a lose-lose for everyone. Okay, now that I have gotten my 16-minute soliloquy and introduction out of the way, thank you for that. I will go ahead and... before we move on to the questions, right? The thing I was saying about global release before I started on my slight rant was we're most likely not going to be starting on global release. I know I've more or less made that clear in some of the previous announcements. The objective really, going back to what I just said, is to try and put us in a position to be as successful as possible. And that really will come from going to a kingdom that isn't going to be necessarily overpopulated, right? Global release kingdom, if it does end up being 32, which it could be, and then, depending on how many kingdoms they prep ahead of time. For those of you that played Infinity Kingdom, they released about 5 to 6 kingdoms that they prepped ahead of time in anticipation of global release. And all of those got filled, I think, within 24 hours. So it is, there's a good chance that might happen, depending on how they do it here in CoD. But most likely we won't go to a kingdom, maybe the first couple days after global. It doesn't mean that no one here can go and play global if you want to. I mean, I'll be making an account there just because I make an account in every kingdom. But the most important thing is that we make sure that our level of preparation is solidified. And that comes from having our ideal number of leads. And then really from there, and to be quite honest, really that's it. Like once we have our set number of leads, whether that be 5 or 6 or the ideal 7 I would like, then pretty much filling that with officers is extremely easy. There's really no delaying at that point. It's just, okay, hey, look, we have our minimum number of leads. Let's go ahead and set a date. and then it's basically just like a preparation phase that it goes into. That's pretty much why, it might seem slow at times, because, until you're really ready to go, and start. And trust me when I say that once we do get to that point, which we will, regardless of how long it takes, things will start moving pretty quickly from, dispersing officers and or distributing them into alliances, distributing the players into the alliances based on regions, and then from there it'll be us, laying out plans for what we're going to be doing day one. We'll provide overhead maps where people are going. We'll have contingency plans based on if you see this or you see that. We'll have departments that are set up to basically do outreach and diplomacy with alliances and players from day one in the kingdom, pretty much throughout that first week. If you imagine, and I usually give this example for those of you that have seen the 100 or Lost TV shows, right, which are basically in essence a group of individuals that get plopped on a piece of land and they're basically just told to figure it out, right? It's kind of almost like imagine you being given a big piece of land and being told you need to build a country, you need to establish a country out of this land, and you're given 100,000 people and you're basically just told figure it out. Right, you kind of have to look at it like that. What are you going to do first, right? You're going to probably assess and analyze everyone's skill sets initially, and then, you're probably going to start focusing on the bare minimum things that you need to survive, right? Building lodging, collecting food, foraging, setting up, some level of security or perimeter or fencing, start figuring out who are vocal leaders. Building a government, having communication. All these things, right? That you really should be doing, in my opinion, right? If you're a part of a organized group that has a good head on their shoulders and, really wants to try and put their best foot forward for the players that are there. One of my biggest things that you will often hear me say is, there's a level of accountability and responsibility that I have to the group, which is essentially inclusive of every single player that's here and wants to be a part of this project. And, I extend that to the leads and to the officers and to contributing members just the same. It's really about building a community more so than it is, for me, trying to be number one in everything, so to speak. I think those are always aspirations and those are always goals that I'm sure everyone would like to have, right? I don't think anyone wants to go into whether it end up being a KVK situation, a Merged Kingdom situation, if you're fighting another alliance, where you're going in there with, I don't want to say a losing mentality, but just going in there and not wanting to try and be successful or to win, right? I think everyone wants that. But I think more importantly, if you're trying to build something sustainable, it can't be based on the outcome of a fight or a war. Because if your approach is always that, then your constitution, right, your foundation is very fragile. Right, you could arguably lose your alliance's trust, your players' trust, your group's trust, right, the moment you lose one fight. So that's why it's important to set good, appropriate expectations and not have them be dependent on whether or not you're losing a war, right? It should really be about, we have a fantastic community. We have a lot of people that, as an example, show up for AVA events. They show up to participate and fight. We have game nights. We have great social engagement, interaction on the Discord. Right, being able to make friends, build that level of socialization, to me, is by far the most important thing. That's the foundation that we should really be looking to establish. And then anything that we do from there that's in line with what our goals are as a group, and that has objectives in mind for levels of success beyond that, is just icing on the cake. So anyways, with that in mind, that's pretty much where we're at now. So I will open the floor up for any questions, and specifically I'll just kind of go top down as we usually do. And this is just based on who's in voice. It shows the same for everyone. So you'll see who is in order as far as where I'll go. And in this part, you can either come on voice if you want to ask a question, or if you want to type your question in the CoD P voice chat. Then you're more than welcome to. And lastly, if you are unable or just do not want to come on voice or ask a question, that is fine as well. I'll just wait a couple seconds, and if I don't hear anything, I'll just move on to the next person. Okay. Let me start with... oh, God, excuse me. Oh, but Jesus. Let me start with Mr. Sneaky. My boy. All right, let's go to... How about Bodaman? Okay, how about Chisato?
Pass.
Chisato passes. Pass the capacity. Let's go to I Am Rage.
All good here.
All right, Rage is Gucci. How about Jazz or Jasm?
All good.
Alrighty, Jasm's all good. How about KRK? Or if that's Kirk.
Ivy a pass.
Okay, okay. How about Luft?
Good.
Okay, Luft's good. How about Michael?
Do you have an approximate date in mind for when you think we might start? Are we talking like days after release, weeks after release, or is it going to be whenever the time is right? Is it going to be that sort of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the latter in that sense, and yeah, it's for example, one of the reasons why I know I had mentioned before, at least in one of the previous announcements, for this really being more of a marathon, not necessarily a sprint. Again, I don't know if you or even for anyone else here who has been a part of a jump project in Rock or even projects in general across other kingdom builders where maybe you don't have that ability to get ahead like you do in Rock, especially when you consider what it is now. Oh my God, excuse me, big gun. Sorry, I was trying to say if you consider what it is now versus what it used to be in Rock, where you could double jump and just really stack rewards back in the day. But the short version is, yes, it will more or less be the right time. There's been, a lot of projects that I've seen myself, and for those of you who watch my Rise of Kingdom jumper project review videos that I do, once a month, once every 2 months, that probably will give you a nice taste of when you're going in and you're looking at just the level of preparedness that, respectfully, almost all the projects out there that I've seen just don't really have as much as they may think they do. That's probably a good way of putting it. I've reviewed quite a lot of projects, and I've had the opportunity to do quite a few myself. And I'm a big believer that I'm a big believer that no one should go into doing projects with the mindset that you just can't wait to do the next one. My approach has always been kind of a one and done type deal, right? I go in there with the idea of I want to do this one so it can be my last, right? Not so I have to go and do another one. It's a lot of work. But more than that, if you are unable to take something away or anything away from a previous project, and you're just kind of doing the definition of insanity, expecting and hoping for different results as you continue to do them, you're probably not in the right space to be running projects or being a leader in general. I've been fortunate and happy enough and fulfilled enough where when a new project that I have done was right to do at that time, there's always something I've taken away, usually multiple things where we make adjustments, we make improvements here or there, being able to learn and have good self-awareness and do self-assessments so you can always be looking to make improvements, I think is very important. And so anyways, that all of that just to really say that it's one of the reasons why for me there's no hurry. There's never a rush. I'd rather take a kind of a cool, calm, and collected approach, make sure that we have a stable foundation. And I'll just give you an example if this helps anyone. Every project that I've ever done, we've always been the biggest group in a kingdom, and we've always had majority presence in a kingdom, which basically, in another way of saying that is, every single one of my projects has always gone into a kingdom where we pretty much immediately know that we're going to be having kind of a controlling interest in the kingdom, right? We'll kind of be the controlling managers of the kingdom because we are the biggest. And it goes back to what I was saying before, right? When you have the biggest stick because you've done the most amount of prep work, it can deter a lot of other people from wanting to challenge you or to fight. And that's not to say in the same breath, or not to say, it's not the same as saying that, you're out there to bully people, take whatever you want. It's that says never, for anyone who's worked with me before, that's not my approach. My approach is I want everyone to eat, right? I want everyone to be able to grow. It's a rising tide lifts all boats approach. It doesn't matter if they're a part of our group or not. Of course, there's some subtle differences between if you're a part of our group or not, but it doesn't mean that we are isolating people or discriminating them because they're just not a part of our group, this or that type of a deal. So, again, if anything, I hope that gives a little bit of context to why it is that, I wouldn't want to start right away, and why I feel it's more important to wait until we have and are at a point where we are really ready to pull the trigger. Hopefully,
that's fair.
How many R5s are you at?
I think someone asked me that. Oh no, sorry. I think I had to give an update on that before. We're at, I think we're at. I think it's 2 or 3. I have to check one of my inboxes for a message on the 3rd, and we have 2. We have 2 in the pipeline right now that I am waiting to do voice interviews with. So, but yeah, it's interesting because when I did my very first jump project in Rock, which was back in 1904, it's interesting because when you do a project, right, you typically get to know the leaders, the officers, a little bit more or I should say a little bit more than the average player, right? If they're not necessarily a contributing player, they're just kind of going with the flow. And, depending on how things go in a project, usually you're able to take away the people that really believed in the project, the people that were really there for the right reasons versus the people that weren't. And from that, you can sometimes almost look at it in a macro sense of, I'm doing this project, and even if things go to shiitake mushrooms, or if things just do not work out to a degree with certain individuals or even myself, I've established good relationships with a few of these leaders, and I know that they really believed in the project. And so it makes it easier when and or if you decide to do another project, because then you can have a network, a connection already established with these leads that really believed in the project, they really understood it, they really wanted to see it to fruition, but for whatever reason it just wasn't able to, right? Whether that's fully or to an extent. You can then arguably almost transition or transfer those players to wanting to run it back, right? And so I've always been very fortunate in that regard, where almost every project I've done since my first project, I've always had carryover. That's the word I was looking for. I've always had carryover from the leader level to the officer level to the player level, where individuals just wanted to run it back with me because they really saw the value they really saw the potential in what I wanted to build with the group. And they were excited to be a part of it. I mean, I can tell you even a few people here in the call right now have been with me in previous projects. I mean, that's a testament, right, to, I guess, of its own. At least I hope it is. Let me not necessarily speak for everyone too forwardly, but that's something I like to believe. And so I think from that, and that's not to say that in me telling you that, that's not to say that this project is going to play out that way. Again, I hope for the best, and that's really my always idea to be in that type of situation where we can be successful and we don't necessarily have to consider or even look at those opportunities. Anyways, now I feel like I'm somewhat ranting, but again, hope that answered the question, Mike. Warzy? Alrighty.
Mr. Sneaky said he sent you coordinates to try and give people something to watch because there's a fight going on. Said that about 20 minutes ago though, so I don't know how it's
is it
gonna
probably
go.
here? Oh. Yeah, maybe it could be here. Yeah, it was. it was pretty much around here. So yeah, it might come back. Anyways, at this point, let me just open it up fully. Now, if there's any questions anyone has, just feel free. You could fire them off. This is just the total open for time if you want to voice it or text.
I don't know if you already answered the people in COD meeting questions. So there was 2 there, well 3. You've got Vakorg, Voldemort, and Exar. Put 1 in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I already that's fine then.
Yeah. No, that'll be that'll be next. Okay. All right, let me get to these then. So, and then we can come back. So, let me see. Vakorg says, judging by the time of the meetings, the time for organizing various events, battles in the game will not suit me. What should I do? So, I think the meetings are really more isolated incidents, or isolated situations. It's not indicative of when the alliance itself will be on, just because the players that join that alliance, even though some of them, if not maybe the majority in the beginning, will be dispersed from a dedicated region, or a region, one of the 3 regions that we have, at least as much as possible. Then you're also going to be having other players that will join the alliance. So for that, usually once an alliance is filled, then it kind of becomes the duty, right, the responsibility of the alliance leader and the officers to then basically reassess and gauge the activity windows for their players. So one of the things, like for example, when I was hitting alliances, one of the things we would usually do is when we started, we would do an initial survey for everyone, and just something simple such as, I would just DM everyone in game and just ask them, hey, can you just let me know, what's your average playing time, Monday through Thursday, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then they would just tell me, right? And then I would jot all that down in a spreadsheet, and then I would do out from all the players. I would add some graphs to it, and then bam, right now I have, Monday, I'd have Saturday, Sunday, and Tuesday are our most active days overall. And then here's what our peak active time is per day on average, right? Because you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. But doing things like that is really important. So, when that happens, the alliances will typically take charge on that, and we'll probably put everything into a master sheet so that way everyone can kind of keep track of those things together. Let me see. Voldemort asked, I'm also facing issue in meeting timings. I'm from India. Would like to see if there are other timings which are good for everyone. Yeah, so again, as far as like meeting times, that was one of the reasons why I know I had mentioned in the beginning of going through, and I'm probably just going to do a Google form or something, whether it's that or another, to allow for each hour of each day to be selectable for a starting time. Right now it is a little bit limited because we're only doing it 2 days and there's a 2-hour block window. And so some people might just be thinking, well, we're going to meet for 2 hours. And they're like, oh, I'm not going to check anything off because I can't meet for 2 hours. When really it's just the starting time. And I don't know, how good of a job I probably did in explaining that, but that'll be something that when the next version comes out, hopefully today or tomorrow, that'll be hopefully more crystal clear. So yeah, hopefully that'll answer that for you, Voldemort, when you listen to the VOD. And then Czar asked, what server do we plan on starting in after full release? And I guess I kind of already have answered that, but to give a TLDR version for Czar when he watches the VOD is we'll start essentially once we have a minimum, if not close to a minimum amount of leaders. Sorry, Shisato said, questions to add. Might be able to find players who can step up, might find other alliances who see the vision and the goals of the project and want to join into the group and become other alliance. Okay, so you can see in the file. Okay, that sounds good. Still nice. Any other? Sorry, let me come back now. Any other questions anyone has? At this point, again, just an open floor. So feel free to ask anything if you'd like. I know we're almost at, what's my timing right now? We're almost at 42 minutes. So it's actually been decent so far. So I'll just give it another minute or two. All right. Well, if that's it, I think that'll probably do it for us. I'm just going to go ahead and stop the recording. And again, I appreciate everyone for stopping by and taking some time out of your day to join us for the meeting. Again, as always, right, if there's any interest, of course, there will be some links to the project, the Discord, etc., in the pinned comment and description. That's it for us.